heartbreak intertwine like autumn leaves in the wind. Sarah Mitchell steps off the dusty stagecoach, her dreams of a new life clutched close like the single valise in her trembling hands. But fate has other plans. Instead of a warm welcome, she finds her intended groom cold in his bed, leaving her stranded in a town where she knows no one. Just as despair threatens to overwhelm her, Alexander Kane, the territory's wealthiest rancher, discovers her plight. With quiet strength and gentle understanding, he offers her sanctuary at his sprawling ranch. What begins as a simple act of kindness blooms into something deeper, something neither of them expected to find at this stage of life. But can love truly blossom from such tragic beginnings? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Cedar Grove's main street as Sarah Mitchell fought to maintain her composure. Her legs trembled beneath her dark traveling skirts, the weight of her situation pressing down on her shoulders like a heavy winter cloak. The town doctor, a weathered man with kind eyes named Harrison Wells, gently guided her away from the small clapboard house where James Cooper lay. "Miss Mitchell, I'm truly sorry," Dr. Wells said, his voice gruff with sympathy. "From what I can tell, he passed peacefully in his sleep, perhaps 2 days ago." Sarah clutched the letter in her pocket. The last correspondence from James Cooper dated just 3 weeks prior. His neat penmanship had spoken of preparations for their wedding, of the small house he'd furnished for them, of his eagerness to provide her a good life, away from the memories of her late husband in Boston. Now those words felt like ashes in her hands. Sheriff Marcus Tate stood nearby, his badge catching the fading sunlight. "Ma'am, did Mr. Cooper mention any illness in his letters?" His tone was professional but gentle, clearly aware of her distress. "No," Sarah managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "His letters spoke only of good health and future plans." She withdrew the folded paper from her pocket, hands shaking as she offered it to the sheriff. As he took it, a gold pocket watch slipped from James's final letter, landing with a soft thud in the dust at her feet. Alexander Kane, who had been speaking quietly with his ranch foreman near the doctor's wagon, stepped forward and retrieved the timepiece. He studied it briefly, before holding it out to Sarah. "It stopped at 3:17, he observed, his deep voice carrying a note of curiosity. "Doctor, would that help determine the time of death?" Dr. Wells nodded thoughtfully. "Could very well match up with my initial assessment. The weather's been cool these past few nights." Sarah stared at the watch in her palm, its golden surface, still warm from Alexander Kane's touch. She had never seen it before, had never known James Cooper in life, and now this small piece of him felt like both a gift and a cruel joke from fate. Here she stood, 32 years old, twice robbed of a chance at happiness, first by her young husband Thomas's fever 3 years ago, and now by the death of a man she had never met, but had dared to hope might give her a new beginning. "Miss Mitchell," Alexander Kane's voice broke through her reverie, "you'll need lodging. The Silver Dollar Hotel—" "I haven't the funds," Sarah interrupted, her cheeks flushing with shame. "I used most of my savings for the stage passage." The admission cost her pride dearly, but there was no sense hiding the truth of her situation. Kane's expression remained neutral, but his eyes softened. "Then you'll stay at my ranch. Mrs. Bradford, my housekeeper, will ensure you have everything you need until we can sort this out." Sarah wanted to refuse, her Boston propriety bristling at the idea of accepting charity from a stranger. But as the sun sank lower and the evening chill began to creep through her travel-worn clothes, she recognized the wisdom in accepting his offer. This was not Boston, with its familiar streets and social safety nets. This was the Wyoming territory, where survival often depended on the kindness of strangers. "Thank you, Mr. Kane," she said finally, her voice steady, despite the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "You're very kind." As Alexander Kane helped her into his waiting buggy, Sarah caught sight of a man watching from the shadows of the mercantile. Thomas Whitaker, Kane's foreman, stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. Something in his steady gaze made Sarah shiver, though she couldn't have said why. The buggy pulled away from the somber scene, leaving behind the house where her dreams had died for the second time. Sarah clutched James Cooper's pocket watch, its quiet face reflecting the last rays of sunset, keeping its secrets close. The Kane Ranch emerged from the darkness like a dream, its sprawling main house silhouetted against the star-filled Wyoming sky. Sarah watched through the buggy's window as they passed under an iron arch bearing the ranch's brand, a stylized K with a crown above it. Lanterns glowed welcomingly from the wraparound porch, and smoke curled from 2 of the 3 brick chimneys. "Circle K Ranch," Alexander Kane said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them during the ride. "Been in my family for 20 years now. My father started it with just 50 head of cattle and a dream." There was quiet pride in his voice, the kind that came from building something substantial and lasting. As they drew closer, Sarah could make out more details: the freshly painted white clapboard siding, green shutters, and a well-tended flower garden that suggested a woman's touch. The house spoke of prosperity earned through hard work rather than inherited wealth. A plump woman in her 60s hurried out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Kane, we've been worried sick with you out so late." Her eyes fell on Sarah, and her expression shifted from concern to immediate understanding. "Oh, dear Lord, this must be Miss Mitchell." Alexander helped Sarah down from the buggy. "Mrs. Bradford, Miss Mitchell will be staying with us for a time. She's had a difficult day." "James Cooper's intended?" Mrs. Bradford's face softened with sympathy. "We heard about his passing just hours ago. Thomas rode ahead to tell us." She took Sarah's cold hands in her warm ones. "Come inside, dear. I've got soup keeping hot on the stove and fresh bread cooling on the rack." The interior of the house matched its impressive exterior. Rich wood paneling lined the walls, and a grand staircase curved up to the second floor. But unlike the austere mansion Sarah remembered from Boston, this home felt lived in and welcoming. A fire crackled in the main hearth, and the smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. Mrs. Bradford led them to a cozy dining room where the table was already set for 3. "I took the liberty," she said, answering Alexander's questioning. "Look, figured nobody would have thought about feeding the poor girl." Over bowls of rich beef stew and warm bread, Alexander shared more about the ranch. "We run close to 2,000 head of cattle now, and we're one of the main suppliers for the railroad companies moving west. The operation's grown considerably since my father's day." Sarah found herself drawn into the conversation, despite her exhaustion. "Your father must be very proud." A shadow crossed Alexander's face. "He passed 5 years ago. Mother followed a year later, but yes, I think they'd be proud of what we've built here." He gestured to include Mrs. Bradford, who beamed at the acknowledgement. "The ranch deeds in the study," Alexander continued, "signed by my father the day he bought this land. He always said that piece of paper was worth more than gold because it represented not just ownership, but the chance to build something lasting." Sarah nodded, understanding the value of such dreams. She had carried similar hopes in her letters to James Cooper, dreams of building a new life, of finding purpose again after loss. As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Bradford gently touched her hand. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns, dear. Sometimes what seems like an ending is just God opening a different door." Sarah managed a small smile, though her heart still felt heavy with grief, not so much for James Cooper himself, whom she had never known, but for the future she had imagined with him. Now she sat in a stranger's home, dependent on kindness. She had no way to repay. "Thank you both," she said softly. "I don't know what I would have done without your generosity today." Alexander's eyes met hers across the table, their deep brown color warm in the lamplight. "We take care of our own out here, Miss Mitchell. The territory may seem wild, but we survive by looking out for each other. Something in his steady gaze made Sarah feel, for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, that perhaps all hope was not lost after all. Morning came to Circle K Ranch in layers of sound. Roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, boots on wooden floors, and the clatter of pots in the kitchen below. Sarah woke in the prettiest guest room she'd ever seen. Sunlight streaming through lace curtains onto a handmade quilt. On the bedside table lay a set of brass keys with a small note in Mrs. Bradford's neat handwriting. For your use, room key, library, and garden gate. Make yourself at home. The simple gesture of trust brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 remaining clean dresses, a practical navy cotton that had survived the journey well, and made her way downstairs. The house felt different in daylight, its grandeur softened by signs of daily life. A forgotten book on a window seat, fresh-cut wildflowers in simple pottery vases, a man's hat hung carelessly on a hook. Mrs. Bradford was already busy in the kitchen, her grey hair escaping its bun as she directed 2 young maids in breakfast preparations. Good morning, dear. Mr. Kane's usually up with the sun, but he waited to have breakfast with you. He's in the morning room. Sarah found Alexander in a sunny room overlooking the garden, reading a newspaper. He stood when she entered, and she noticed again how his presence filled a room, not just with his physical height, but with a quiet authority that seemed as natural as breathing. I hope you slept well, Miss Mitchell, he said, folding the paper. Please join me. He pulled out a chair at the small table where coffee and warm biscuits waited. Thank you, I did, and thank you for the keys. It was most thoughtful. This is your home for as long as you need it to be, he said simply. I want you to feel comfortable here. He poured coffee for them both, adding cream to his own. I thought you might like a tour of the ranch today if you're feeling up to it, unless you'd prefer to rest. A tour would be lovely, Sarah said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. I'd like to understand more about where I am. She had almost said about you, but caught herself in time. Alexander nodded, seeming to hear the unspoken words anyway. We'll start after breakfast, but first, there's something we should discuss. His expression grew serious. Sheriff Tate sent word this morning. They're having trouble locating any of James Cooper's relatives. The house and its contents may take some time to sort out legally. Sarah set down her coffee cup carefully. I see. I hadn't even thought about such matters. There's more, Alexander continued gently. The doctor's preliminary examination raised some questions. Nothing definitive, but enough that they're looking into things more carefully. Questions. Sarah's voice wavered slightly. What kind of questions? The timing of his death doesn't quite align with what they initially thought. And there were some unusual circumstances. He paused, studying her face. I don't want to burden you with this, but I believe you have a right to know. You were, after all, to be his wife. Sarah straightened her shoulders, drawing on an inner strength she sometimes forgot she possessed. Please, Mr. Kane, I'd rather know the truth, whatever it may be. A flicker of approval crossed his face. Very well. The doctor found traces of what might be poison in Cooper's cup. They're sending samples to Cheyenne for analysis. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sarah thought of the pocket watch, stopped at 3:17, and felt a chill despite the warm morning sun. Who would want to harm him? She whispered, more to herself than to Alexander. That's what they're trying to determine. Cooper wasn't well known in town, kept to himself mostly, but he did have some business. Dealings that the sheriff is looking into. Alexander leaned forward slightly. Sarah, Miss Mitchell, if you remember anything from his letters, anything that seemed odd or out of place, I'll think about every word, she promised. Though they seemed ordinary enough at the time, their eyes met across the table, and Sarah felt something shift. Between them, a shared purpose perhaps, or a deepening trust. Either way, she knew in that moment that her life had become entangled with Alexander Kane's in ways neither of them could have predicted. The morning tour of Circle K Ranch had to wait. Just as Alexander was helping Sarah into his buggy, Thomas Whitaker rode up in a cloud of dust, his expression grim. In his hand was a crumpled piece of paper. "Found this tacked to the stable door. Mr. Kane," he said, passing over what appeared to be a note. "Might want to read it private-like." Alexander unfolded the paper, his face hardening as he read. Without a word, he handed it to Sarah. The message was brief, written in a crude hand. The schoolmarm should have stayed in Boston. Cooper was just the beginning. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the words again. "Who would inside?" Alexander cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. He turned to Thomas. "Get the men together. Full patrol of the property borders and send someone to fetch Sheriff Tate." The grand house suddenly felt like a fortress as Alexander ushered Sarah into his study. It was a masculine room with leather-bound books lining dark wood shelves and a massive oak desk dominated by leather-bound ledgers. He closed the door behind them, then poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a crystal glass and offered it to her. "I don't usually," Sarah began. "Today you do," he said firmly. She took a small sip, the liquid burning down her throat. "That note, it implies James was murdered because of me. But that's impossible. I'd never even set foot in Wyoming before yesterday." Alexander leaned against his desk, his face troubled. "Not necessarily because of you, specifically. Could be what you represent." "I don't understand." "Progress. Change." He gestured to a map on the wall, showing the territory with its newly laid railroad lines cutting across like steel scars. "This territory's changing fast. Railroads bringing settlers, women, children, schools, churches. Some folks don't take kindly to that." Sarah set down the whiskey glass. "But James Cooper invited me here. He wanted a wife, a family." "Yes, and he was also selling parcels of his land to the railroad." Alexander pulled a document from his desk drawer. "Found out this morning from the land office. Cooper had signed contracts to sell significant portions of his property, land that some of the older ranchers had been using for free grazing for years." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Bradford entered, her usual cheerful expression replaced by concern. "Sheriff Tate is here, Mr. Kane, and Dr. Wells with him." The men entered, bringing with them the smell of horses and trail dust. The sheriff held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "The tests from Cheyenne came back," Dr. Wells said without preamble. "It was poison, all right. Arsenic, mixed into his evening tea." Sarah swayed slightly, and Alexander's hand was immediately at her elbow, steadying her. The sheriff cleared his throat. "There's more," he said. "We found this hidden in Cooper's mattress." He produced a leather portfolio, its contents spilling onto Alexander's desk. Land deeds, contracts, and letters. Dozens of them. "These aren't my letters," Sarah said, examining the unfamiliar handwriting. "These are business correspondence?" "Railroad negotiations," the sheriff confirmed, "dating back months. Cooper was buying up land all through the territory, piece by piece, small parcels from struggling homesteaders, strips along the projected railroad route. Man was fixing to make himself a fortune, and make some powerful enemies in the process," Alexander added grimly. Sarah picked up one of the letters, dated just a week before her arrival. "He writes here about securing the final piece. What does that mean?" Alexander and the sheriff exchanged looks. "Could be referring to the Henderson property," the sheriff said slowly. "Old man Henderson's been holding out against selling. To the railroad. His land's key to the whole route through the valley." "Or," Alexander said, his voice tight with sudden understanding, "he could have meant you, Miss Mitchell." "Me?" Sarah's voice cracked. "A wife would make him appear more settled, more respectable, might have helped smooth things with the railroad executives." Alexander's face was apologetic. "I'm sorry, but it's possible your arrival was meant to be the final piece of his plan." Sarah sank into a leather chair, her mind whirling. Everything she'd believed about her fresh start, about James Cooper's interest in her, tilted sideways. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal of her hopes or the humiliation of being used as a pawn in a land scheme. Dr. Wells cleared his throat. "If it helps, Miss Mitchell, you may have been spared a worse fate. A man capable of such calculation might not have made the most loving husband," she finished quietly. "And now someone's threatening you," Alexander said, picking up the crude note again. "Whether because they think you know something about Cooper's dealings, or simply to frighten away another sign of changing times." "I won't be frightened away," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "I may not have chosen to be part of this situation, but I'm here now, and I want to know the truth." Alexander studied her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. "Then we'll find it, together." The sheriff nodded. Grimly, "I'll post men around the ranch, and I'll start asking questions about who knew about Cooper's plans." As the men discussed security measures, Sarah moved to the window, watching dust devils dance across the distant plains. She'd come to Wyoming seeking a new life, and fate had handed her a mystery instead. But as she glanced back at Alexander, Kane's strong profile, she wondered if perhaps the two weren't somehow intertwined. Sarah spent the next morning in the ranch's small schoolroom, a converted storage building that now housed 6 wooden desks and a small blackboard. Her teaching certificate, carefully preserved despite the long journey from Boston, sat on the teacher's desk, a reminder of who she was before all this began. "The children come 3 times a week," Mrs. Bradford explained, helping Sarah dust the desks. "Ranching families from miles around. Mr. Kane had this built 2 years ago, but we've had trouble keeping teachers. Most young women don't stay long in the territory." "It's perfect," Sarah breathed, running her hand along the smooth wood of the teacher's desk. Here was something familiar, something she could hold on to, while the rest of her world shifted like quicksand beneath her feet. A knock at the door revealed Alexander, his broad-shouldered frame filling the doorway. "I see Mrs. Bradford's shown you your domain." "My domain?" Sarah asked. "If you'd like it to be. We need a teacher and you need a purpose. Unless I'm overstepping." Sarah felt warmth bloom in her chest. "No, you're not overstepping. I'd love to teach here." Mrs. Bradford beamed. "I'll spread the word to the families. They'll be so pleased." After the housekeeper left, Alexander lingered, watching Sarah arrange books on a shelf. "You seem more settled today." "Teaching helps," she admitted. "It's something I know, something I'm good at." She turned to face him. "Thank you for this opportunity. You're good with more than just teaching," he said quietly. "The way you handled yesterday's revelations, most women would have fallen apart or run screaming back to Boston." She managed a small smile. "I considered it, I'll admit, but that would feel like letting them win, whoever them might be." Alexander's expression grew serious. "About that, Sheriff Tate's been asking around about Cooper's business dealings. Seems our neighbor Marcus Blackwood had some heated words with him the week before his death, something about land access rights. The cattle baron you mentioned, the same. Controls most of the North Valley grazing lands. He's been fighting the railroad's expansion tooth and nail." Alexander moved to the window, gazing out at the distant hills. Man like that, used to having his way. He wouldn't take kindly to Cooper's plans. Sarah joined him at the window. "You think he might have?" "I think we need to be careful. Blackwood's not the type to get his own hands dirty, but he has men who would." He turned to face her. "Which is why I'd like you to learn to shoot. I beg your pardon. Basic self-defense. How to handle a revolver. The territory can be dangerous enough without death threats involved." His eyes held hers steadily. "Will you let me teach you?" Sarah thought of the crude note, of Cooper's stopped pocket watch, of all the questions still unanswered. "Yes," she said firmly. "When do we start?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "This afternoon, if you're willing. Though first, I believe I still owe you that tour of the ranch." The morning sun had burned away the early chill as they rode out in Alexander's buggy. Sarah found herself relaxing as he pointed out various aspects of the ranch operations, the calving pastures, the new irrigation system, the line shacks where cowboys stayed during roundup time. "Your father built all this from nothing?" she asked, impressed by the scope of the operation. He had a gift for seeing potential where others saw only wilderness. Alexander's voice carried that same quiet pride she'd noticed before. Taught me everything I know about ranching and about life, really. He sounds like a remarkable man. He was. Alexander clicked to the horses, guiding them up a small rise. There's something I'd like to show you. They crested the hill, and Sarah gasped. Below them stretched a hidden valley, filled with wildflowers in full bloom. A small stream wound through it, its banks lined with cottonwoods. It's beautiful, she breathed. My mother's favorite spot. She used to paint here. He helped her down from the buggy. I thought you might like a place to come when you need. To think, or just to be away from everything for a while. Sarah turned to him, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. Thank you, Mr. Kane. Alexander, he said softly, please. Their eyes met, and Sarah felt that same connection she'd sensed yesterday in his study, a recognition of something shared, something growing between them despite the circumstances that had brought her here. The moment was broken by the sound of hoofbeats. Thomas Whitaker appeared over the rise, his expression dark. Mr. Kane, rider coming in from town. There's been another incident. The ride back to the ranch house passed in tense silence. At the front porch, Sheriff Tate waited with a document in his hands, his expression grim. Two of his deputies stood nearby, their hands resting meaningfully on their gun belts. Marcus. Blackwood filed an injunction this morning, the sheriff said without preamble, handing the paper to Alexander. Claims Cooper's land sale contracts were fraudulent. He's demanding all transactions be frozen pending investigation. Alexander's jaw tightened as he read. This is nothing but a delaying tactic. There's more, Sheriff Tate continued. Henderson's barn burned down last night. No proof it's connected, but Henderson was the last holdout against selling. To the railroad, Sarah finished, remembering their earlier conversation. The same railroad Cooper was working with. The sheriff nodded approvingly. You catch on quick, Miss Mitchell. Yes, and now Henderson's spooked. Says he'll sell to Blackwood instead of waiting for the railroad's offer. Convenient timing, Alexander said darkly. He turned to Thomas. Double the patrols. I want eyes on every fence line, especially where we border Blackwood's property. Sarah studied the injunction notice, her teacher's eye catching details others might miss. This document, the language is peculiar. It specifically mentions all parties with knowledge or claim to said contracts. Wouldn't that include me, since I was to marry Cooper? Alexander took the paper back, frowning as he reread it. She's right. This isn't just about the land deals. They're trying to tie you to Cooper's business dealings legally. But why? Sarah asked. I knew nothing about any of this until yesterday. Because as Cooper's intended bride, you might have claimed to his estate, the sheriff explained. And if the estate is tied up in legal battles, the railroad contract deadlines could expire, Alexander finished. Blackwood wins by default. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the afternoon breeze. So, I'm not just a loose end to be frightened away. I'm a legal liability, one that certain parties might want to eliminate entirely, Thomas added bluntly, earning a sharp look from Alexander. You'll stay close to the house, Alexander said to Sarah, his tone leaving no room for argument. And we'll start those shooting lessons today, not later. The sheriff cleared his throat. About that, found something else you should see. He reached into his vest and withdrew a folded paper. This land dispute document was in Cooper's effects. Shows Blackwood tried to buy him out 6 months ago. Cooper refused. Sarah took the document, noting the angry red ink annotations in the margins. These numbers, they're far above market value. Why would he refuse such an offer? Because? Cooper was thinking bigger, Alexander said. Railroad money would dwarf even Blackwood's generous offer, and Blackwood doesn't take rejection well. Last man who refused to sell to him had his cattle stampeded through his corn crop, Thomas added. Nothing ever proven, of course. Sarah handed the document back to the sheriff, her mind working. If Cooper knew he was making enemies, why invite me here? Why complicate things with a marriage? Respectability. Alexander suggested again. Or maybe what? Maybe he genuinely wanted someone to share his success with. Alexander's eyes met hers. Not everyone's motives are dark, even in business. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Bradford calling them in for lunch. As they moved toward the house, Thomas held back, catching Sarah's arm gently. "Miss Mitchell," he said quietly, "mind if I offer some advice?" She nodded, surprised by his serious tone. "Mr. Kane's a good man, best I've ever worked for. But this situation," he glanced at the retreating forms of Alexander and the sheriff. "Don't let your guard down, not with anyone." Before Sarah could respond, he touched his hat brim and strode off toward the stables, leaving her to wonder if his warning was meant to protect her or Alexander. The shooting lesson took place behind the barn, where Alexander had set up empty bottles on a weathered fence rail. Sarah tried to focus on his instructions, but her attention kept drifting to an old photograph she'd noticed that morning, half hidden behind books in the library. A younger Alexander with a beautiful dark-haired woman in a wedding dress. "Hold it firm against your shoulder," Alexander was saying, positioning the rifle in her hands. "That's it, now sight down the barrel. Who was she?" The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it, his hands stilled on the rifle. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, then softly, "Catherine, my wife." Sarah lowered the rifle. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "No, you have a right to know." He took the rifle, setting it carefully aside, "especially now that you're involved in all this." He gestured to a nearby hay bale, and they sat together in the late afternoon sun. "Catherine died 8 years ago," he said, his voice carrying old pain. "Fever took her and our unborn child. I was in Cheyenne on business. By the time I got back—" He trailed off, his eyes distant. "That's why you built the schoolroom," Sarah realized. "It would have been for your child." Alexander nodded. "Catherine was a teacher like you. She always said education was the future of the territory." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She'd have liked you." Sarah's heart ached for him, for the life he'd lost. "Is that why you've never remarried?" "Partly, but also because of what happened after." His expression hardened. "While I was grieving, certain parties tried to take advantage, made moves on the ranch, claimed I wasn't fit to manage it. Marcus Blackwood led that charge." "Blackwood again," Sarah murmured. "He offered to buy the ranch for a generous price, said it would be best for everyone." Alexander's voice carried years of bitterness. "I threw him off my property. Been feuding ever since. And now, history's repeating itself," Sarah said. "Another death, another land grab attempt. Except this time we know what we're dealing with." He stood, offering her his hand. "Come on, let's get back to that shooting lesson." As Sarah raised the rifle again, she felt Alexander's solid presence behind her, adjusting her stance. The warmth of him was distracting, but comforting too. "Breathe in," he instructed, his voice close to her ear. "Breathe out slowly as you squeeze the trigger." The rifle cracked and one of the bottles exploded. Sarah lowered the gun, surprised and pleased. "Well done," Alexander said softly, still standing close. "You're a natural." Their eyes met, and Sarah felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. But before either could speak, a horse's whinny broke the moment. Thomas rode up, his expression urgent. "Mr. Kane, rider coming in fast. It's Henderson's boy." Young Billy, Henderson, no more than 16, nearly fell from his lathered horse. "Mr. Kane, Pa sent me. Blackwood's men. They're blocking access to the creek. Says since Pa's selling to him now, all water rights revert immediate. That creek feeds half the farms in the valley," Alexander growled. "He can't do that." "Pa says there's going to be trouble. Some of the farmers are talking about forcing the issue." Alexander's face grew grim. "Billy, you ride into town. Tell the sheriff what's happening, Sarah." "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Go." He hesitated, then quickly squeezed her hand. "Stay close to the house. Thomas will keep watch." As Alexander rode off with several ranch hands, Sarah watched. From the barn door, the rifle still warm in her hands. The territory was balanced on a knife's edge, she realized. One push in the wrong direction could send everything spiraling into violence. Behind her, Thomas cleared his throat. "Miss Mitchell, found something you should see." He held out a worn leather journal. "Was going through the old storage room. Came across this. It's Catherine's diary." Sarah took it carefully, understanding the weight of what she was being offered. "Are you sure I should read it?" Thomas said firmly. "Might help you understand what you're really dealing with here." He touched his hat brim and walked away, leaving Sarah to wonder yet again about the layers of mystery surrounding Circle K Ranch. Sarah waited until she was alone in the library, curled in the window seat with the afternoon sun warming the leather cover of Catherine's diary. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it, feeling like an intruder in another woman's private thoughts. The first entries were ordinary enough: daily life on the ranch, weather reports, cattle counts. But then she found a newspaper clipping dated 8 years ago, tucked between the pages. The headline caught her eye: "Railroad Survey Team Reports Rich Coal Deposits in North Valley." Catherine's entry below was agitated, the normally neat handwriting rushed. "I knows nothing about this yet. He's still in Cheyenne. MB came by again today, pressing about the sale. Said he'd make it worth our while. When I refused, he turned ugly. Said we'd regret being stubborn. I should tell A when he returns, but he's under so much pressure already with the railroad negotiations." Sarah's breath caught. Railroad negotiations. 8 years ago? She flipped through more pages, finding another entry: "Strange men watching the ranch. Thomas says they're Blackwood's hands, but they don't move like cowboys. A is still delayed in Cheyenne. Something about contract disputes. I've asked Dr. Wells to come by. The baby's fine, but I can't shake this fever." The entries stopped. And there, Sarah sat back, her mind whirling. An old newspaper clipping from the town archives had mentioned Catherine dying of fever, but these entries suggested something more sinister. A knock at the door made her jump. Mrs. Bradford entered with a tea tray, her usual cheerful expression clouded with worry. "Any word from Alexander?" Sarah asked, carefully closing the diary. "Not yet." Mrs. Bradford set down the tray. "But Thomas spotted riders along the north fence. Blackwood's men, most likely." She nodded at the diary. "Found some interesting reading, did you?" "Mrs. Bradford." Sarah hesitated. "What do you remember about Catherine's death?" The housekeeper's hands stilled on the teapot. "I wasn't here then. Came on just after, when Mr. Kane needed help putting the house back together." She poured tea with careful precision. "But I remember the talk in town. Some said it was mighty convenient timing, her passing when she did." "Convenient for whom?" Blackwood had been pushing to buy the ranch for months. Offered Alexander 3 times its worth right after the funeral. Mrs. Bradford's voice hardened. "Man has no shame." Sarah showed her the newspaper clipping. "Because of the coal deposits?" "That, and the water rights. That creek Billy Henderson was talking about? It's fed by underground springs. In a dry territory, water's worth more than gold." She looked sharply at Sarah. "You think Catherine's death wasn't natural?" "I think there are too many patterns repeating. James Cooper dies when he refuses to sell. Catherine dies during railroad negotiations. And now Henderson's barn burns, and suddenly he's willing to sell to Blackwood." Mrs. Bradford sank into a chair. "Lord above. Does Alexander know about this?" "About what?" Alexander's voice came from the doorway, making them both start. He looked trail-worn and angry, his face streaked with dust. Sarah stood, still holding the diary. "About what really happened to Catherine." His expression shuttered. "We know what happened. She died of fever while I was away." "Like Cooper died in his sleep," Sarah pressed. "Alexander, look at this." She showed him the diary entries and the clipping. The timing, the threats, Blackwood's pressure. It's the same pattern. He read in silence, his face growing darker with each line. When he finished, he slammed his fist against the wall, making both women jump. "All these years," he growled. "I should have seen it." "You were grieving," Sarah said softly. "And Blackwood. Use that, just like he's using Cooper's death now." He looked at Sarah, his eyes intense. "The water rights dispute today, it's a distraction. His men were testing our response time, seeing how many riders we'd send." "Why?" "Because tomorrow's the deadline for Cooper's estate to respond to the injunction. If no one contests it, Blackwood's claim moves forward." He took her hands. "Sarah, you're the only one with legal standing to challenge it. As Cooper's intended bride, you can file a counterclaim. And that's what they're afraid of," she whispered. "That's why they wanted to frighten me away. Or worse." His grip on her hands tightened. "I won't let history repeat itself. Not this time." A shot rang out in the gathering dusk, and a window shattered behind them. Alexander pulled Sarah down as more bullets splintered the wood paneling. "Get to the cellar," he shouted to Mrs. Bradford, shielding Sarah with his body. "Thomas, we're under attack." The cellar was dark and cool, smelling of earth and stored apples. Sarah huddled with Mrs. Bradford behind stacked barrels as gunfire continued above. The housekeeper clutched her rosary, lips moving in silent prayer. Sarah's mind raced, remembering her shooting lesson from earlier. The rifle was still in the library, propped by the window seat. She pictured Alexander up there, defending his home, and felt suddenly fiercely angry. This had gone on long enough. "Mrs. Bradford," she whispered, "is there another way out of the cellar?" "The root cellar tunnel," the older woman replied, "leads to the old storm shelter behind the barn. But surely you're not thinking—" "Show me." The housekeeper hesitated, then nodded grimly. She led Sarah to a rough wooden door set into the earth wall, its hinges carefully oiled despite apparent disuse. "Alexander's father built this during Indian troubles. Hasn't been needed in years." The tunnel was narrow but tall enough to walk through, shored up with timber supports. Their single lantern cast jumping shadows as they hurried along its length. Sarah's skirts collected dirt, but she hardly noticed. They emerged into the storm shelter where they could hear the gunfight more clearly. Thomas's voice rang out, directing the ranch hands. But it was another sound that caught Sarah's attention, horses moving through the brush behind the barn. "They're trying to flank them," she realized. Without thinking, she grabbed a spare rifle from the shelter's wall rack. "Miss Mitchell," Mrs. Bradford's whisper was sharp, "you can't— I won't hide while others fight my battles." Sarah checked the rifle's load like Alexander had taught her. "Not anymore." She slipped out of the shelter, staying in the shadows of the barn. The moon was rising, casting enough light to see several riders trying to circle behind the ranch house. They hadn't expected anyone to be behind them. Sarah's first shot went wide, but it startled the riders. Her second caught one man's hat, sending him tumbling from his saddle. The others wheeled their horses, suddenly uncertain which direction the threat was coming from. "Sarah!" Alexander's voice carried from the house. "The barn!" She turned to see flames beginning to lick up the barn's wooden walls, a torch thrown by one of Blackwood's men. Without thinking, she ran for the water pump, her teacher's instincts remembering the line of buckets always kept ready for fire. Alexander appeared beside her, manning the pump while she filled buckets. Ranch hands emerged from their defensive positions to form a waterline. The attackers, their surprise advantage lost, melted away into the darkness. Dawn found them surveying the damage. Broken windows, bullet-scarred walls, scorched barn siding. But no lives lost, and the ranch still stood. "You could have been killed," Alexander said quietly as they watched the sun rise. They sat on the porch steps, too exhausted to move further. "So could you." Sarah's voice was equally soft. "I couldn't hide in the cellar knowing that." He turned to look at her, his expression complicated. "Catherine would have done the same." A pause. "She did do the same thing, I suspect, standing up to Blackwood, and it got her killed." Sarah's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "She was protecting everything you'd built together, just as we protected it tonight." "We," he repeated, something warming in his eyes. "Sarah, Mr. Kane!" Thomas's shout interrupted them. He rode up fast, leading a horse with a familiar saddle. "Found this one wandering by the creek. It's got the Blackwood brand." Alexander stood, pulling Sarah up with him. And saddlebag had this inside. Thomas held out a stack of papers. Looks like letters between Blackwood and someone in town. Someone who knew about Cooper's plans and Catherine's death. Sarah felt Alexander's hand tighten on hers. Who? Thomas's face was grim. You're not going to like it, sir. Not one bit. The letters trembled in Alexander's hands as he read them in his study. Sarah stood by the window, watching his expression darken with each page. Outside, the first repair crews were already at work on the barn, hammering echoing across the yard. "Dr. Wells," Alexander finally said, his voice thick with betrayal. All this time it was Dr. Wells. Sarah sank into a chair. The town doctor, but he seemed so trustworthy. That's why it worked. Alexander spread the letters across his desk. He was Blackwood's eyes and ears in town, reporting on Catherine's pregnancy, on Cooper's plans, on your arrival. He would have been the one to— Sarah couldn't finish the thought. To poison them. Yes, Alexander's knuckles whitened on the desk edge. The fever that took Catherine, he was treating her for it. And Cooper's tea. Thomas cleared his throat from the doorway. There's more, sir. Dr. Wells isn't in town. His office is cleared out. Sheriff's men found this on his desk. He handed over a crumpled note. Sarah read it over Alexander's shoulder. It's done. The schoolteacher won't be a problem by morning. Payment as agreed. W. By morning? Sarah's voice caught. But it's barely dawn now. Alexander was already moving. Thomas, get the men ready. They'll try something before the courthouse opens. That's when you'd need to file the counterclaim. Alexander! Sarah caught his arm. What if we're reading this wrong? What if the attack last night wasn't the attempt they meant? He stilled. The water, the well, they said together. Alexander sprinted for the kitchen, Sarah close behind. Mrs. Bradford was just lifting the coffee pot. Don't! Alexander shouted, knocking it from her hands. The pot shattered on the floor, dark liquid seeping into the floorboards. Lord have mercy, Mrs. Bradford whispered, understanding dawning. I just drew fresh water from the well. Get everyone away from the house pump, Alexander ordered Thomas, and send someone to check the creek. Sarah was already running for the schoolroom, the children's water bucket, but Alexander caught her arm. No, you're not going out there alone. Those children are safe at home. School's not for hours yet. His grip softened, became a caress. Sarah, please. I can't lose you too. Not like Catherine. She turned to face him fully. Alexander, I'm not Catherine, and hiding won't save me. A shot rang out, the bullet splintering the doorframe beside them. More shots followed as Alexander pulled Sarah down behind a cabinet. Wells, Thomas shouted from outside. He's in the barn loft. Sarah felt Alexander's body tense, ready to sprint toward the danger. She grabbed his shirt. Together, she said firmly. We do this together. His eyes met hers, full of fear and something deeper. Then he nodded. Together. They crouched by the kitchen window, watching Thomas and the ranch hands exchange fire. With the barn loft, Sarah counted shots, remembering her lesson. He's got to be almost out of ammunition. Unless he has more hidden up there. Alexander's tactical mind was working. We need to flank him, but he's got too good a view of the yard. Sarah looked at the small door to the root cellar. What about the tunnel? His eyes lit with understanding. It comes up behind the barn. He studied her face. It's dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. She managed a small smile. But I trust you. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Then Alexander leaned forward and kissed her, swift and fierce. For luck, he whispered. The tunnel felt different this time, darker and more urgent. They moved as quietly as possible. Alexander leading with his revolver ready. At the storm shelter entrance, they could hear the gunfight continuing out front. Ready? Alexander whispered. Sarah gripped her rifle and nodded. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm shelter door creaked softly as they emerged into the pre-dawn shadows behind the barn. Gunfire still crackled from the front, but more sporadically now, Wells conserving ammunition or running low. Sarah touched Alexander's arm, pointing to movement in the hayloft window. A rifle barrel protruded briefly, then withdrew. Wells was dividing his attention between the yard and the back approach, but he couldn't watch both effectively. Alexander motioned for Sarah to stay in the shelter's shadow while he crept along the barn's back wall. She nodded, understanding the plan without words. She'd create a distraction, giving him time to scale the exterior ladder to the hayloft. Staying low, Sarah moved to a position with a clear view of the window. She lifted her rifle, sighting along the barrel, just as Alexander had taught her. Her hands were steady now, fear replaced by cold determination. She fired, the shot punching through the window frame. Wells returned fire immediately, wood splinters flying. Sarah ducked, counted to 3, then fired again. From the corner of her eye, she saw Alexander reaching the ladder. "It's over, Wells," she called out, keeping his attention. "The sheriff's been told everything." "Nothing's over." Wells's voice was thick with desperation. "You have no idea what Blackwood's capable of, what he'll do to anyone who crosses him. Like what you did to Catherine." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. "Was that Blackwood's idea or yours?" A harsh laugh. "That stupid woman wouldn't listen. Nobody would listen. The territory's changing. You either adapt or you die." Alexander was nearly at the loft door. Sarah needed Wells distracted just a moment longer. "Is that what you told Cooper before you poisoned him?" Cooper was a fool. Thought he could play both sides, use his pretty mail-order bride for respectability while he sold us all out to the railroad. Wells's voice grew manic. "But you're worse. Coming here, stirring up the past, making Kane remember things. Better left buried." Sarah saw Alexander slip through the loft door, moving silently through the shadows. Wells was too focused on her to notice. "It wasn't just about land, was it?" Sarah pressed. "You let Catherine die. Watched it happen. Her and her unborn child. She brought it on herself," Wells shouted. "She found the papers, threatened to expose everything. Blackwood's plans, the coal surveys, all of it. What choice did we have?" "We?" Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. "You mean you and Blackwood?" Wells spun, raising his rifle, but Alexander was faster. The gun went flying as the two men crashed together, grappling in the hay-strewn loft. Sarah ran for the barn's interior stairs, taking them 2 at a time. She reached the loft just as Wells pulled a knife. Alexander knocked it away, but Wells drove his shoulder into Alexander's midsection, sending them both staggering toward the loft door. Sarah didn't hesitate. She swung her rifle like a club, catching Wells across the shoulders. He stumbled, giving Alexander the opening he needed. His fist connected with Wells's jaw, sending the doctor crashing into a support beam. But Wells wasn't finished. He lunged for his fallen rifle, fingers closing on the stock. "Blackwood will kill you all," he snarled, starting to swing the barrel up. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. Sarah's bullet struck Wells's shoulder, spinning him around. Alexander's hit sent a mass. The doctor toppled backward through the loft door, falling to the yard below. In the sudden silence, Sarah could hear shouts from the ranch hands, running. Effete, Thomas calling for someone to fetch the sheriff. But all she could focus on was Alexander, whole and alive before her. He crossed the loft in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in leather and gun smoke and him. "I thought," she started. "I know." His arms tightened. "But we did it. Together." "Together," she echoed, raising her face to his. This time, when they kissed, it was slow and deep, full of promise and relief and tomorrow. Dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as Sheriff Tate supervised his deputies, loading Wells's body into a wagon. Sarah sat on the porch steps, wrapped in Alexander's coat despite the warming air. Her hands still trembled slightly when she thought about how close they'd come to disaster. "Miss Mitchell," Thomas approached, holding out a steaming cup of coffee. Mrs. Bradford made a fresh pot, tested it herself. His attempt at humor drew a wan smile from Sarah. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." She looked up at him. "You knew, didn't you? About Wells? That's why you gave me Catherine's diary." He settled on the step beside her, his weathered face serious. Had suspicions, no proof, but when you arrived, started asking questions. Seemed like maybe God was giving us a second chance to make things right. Alexander emerged from his meeting with the sheriff, his face tight with controlled anger. Tate's men found papers in Wells' office, letters, records, going back years. Blackwood's been planning this takeover since before Catherine died. The railroad, Sarah said. He knew it was coming, knew what it would mean for land prices and water rights. Alexander sat on her other side, his solid presence comforting. Wells documented everything, his own insurance policy probably, even wrote down what he used on Catherine, small doses of poison in her medicine, making her weaker each time. Sarah reached for his hand, twining their fingers together. At least now we can prove what happened, give her justice. Some justice. His grip tightened. Blackwood's still out there. Not for long, Thomas said grimly. Sheriff's organizing. A posse. Between Wells's confession and those papers. Sir, a ranch hand called from the yard. Riders coming. Looks like Henderson and some others. They stood, watching the approaching dust cloud resolve into a group of men. Old man Henderson led them, his face red with fury beneath his grey beard. "Kane!" he bellowed, reining in. "Just heard about Wells. That snake tried to poison my family too. Found strange powder in our well this morning." Murmurs ran through the gathered farmers and ranchers. Henderson wasn't finished. "Blackwood's men are blocking water access up and down the valley. Says since I agreed to sell, he owns the water rights now." He spat in the dust. "Well, to hell with that. I ain't selling to no murderer." "None of us are," another farmer added. "We're with you, Kane, whatever comes next." Alexander surveyed the group of determined faces. "Blackwood won't take this lying down. Could get ugly." "Already is ugly," Henderson retorted. "Question is, you gonna lead us in making it right?" Sarah felt Alexander straighten beside her, saw the mantle of leadership settle on his shoulders. This was the man his father had raised him to be, the man Catherine had loved, the man she herself was coming to love. "We'll need a plan," he said. "Can't just ride in shooting." "Already got one," Sarah surprised herself by saying. Everyone turned to look at her. "Those railroad contracts Cooper negotiated? They're still valid. I can file the counterclaim to Blackwood's injunction, but we'll need proof of his crimes to back it up." "Wells's papers," Thomas nodded, "and all these witnesses to the water rights interference. More than that." Sarah's teacher's mind was racing ahead. "The Railroad Commission is meeting in Cheyenne next week. If we can prove Blackwood's been using illegal means to block progress, they'll pull his government contracts." Alexander finished, a slow smile spreading across his face. "And without those contracts, his empire collapses," Henderson said with satisfaction. Alexander turned to Sarah, his eyes warm with admiration. "You're amazing, you know that." She felt herself blush. "I just believe in fighting for what's right, like someone else I know." Their eyes held, the connection between them almost tangible. Then Alexander turned back to the gathered men. "All right, here's what we're going to do." Sarah examined her revolver carefully, just as Alexander had taught her. The weight of it felt familiar now, almost comfortable. From her window in the ranch house, she could see men preparing for tomorrow's confrontation, checking saddles, cleaning weapons, speaking in low, determined voices. "You don't have to come," Alexander said from the doorway. He'd been watching her for several minutes, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "Yes, I do." She turned to face him. "I'm the only one who can file that counterclaim, and after everything that's happened—" She touched the loaded revolver. "I won't hide while others fight my battles. Not anymore." He crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, except maybe Catherine." His smile was sad. "She would have liked that you're finishing what she started." "What we're all finishing," Sarah corrected gently. "This isn't just about Catherine anymore, or Cooper, or me. It's about everyone Blackwood's hurt, everyone he's threatened." A knock interrupted them. Thomas entered, carrying saddlebags full of papers. Got everything from Wells's office, plus Cooper's contracts. Sheriffs authenticated them all. He paused. But Blackwood's men are watching the roads to town. Getting there to file the claim won't be easy. That's why we'll split. Up, Alexander said. 3 groups. Sarah and I will carry the real papers. Henderson's group will draw attention on the main road. Thomas, you'll lead a second decoy group along the river trail. Blackwood's bound to have men at the courthouse, Sarah pointed out. Even if we get there. Already thought of that. Alexander's eyes gleamed. Judge Parker owes me a favor. He'll have deputies waiting. We just have to get you inside. Sarah studied the town map spread across the desk, tracing the back alley that would lead them to the courthouse's side entrance. So much could go wrong, but so much already had. And here she stood, stronger for it. Sarah, Alexander's voice was soft. If anything happens tomorrow, she pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't. We're both coming back. We have too much left to say to each other. His eyes darkened with emotion. Instead of speaking, he pulled her close, kissing her with an intensity that made her knees weak. When they parted, both breathless, she saw her own determination reflected in his face. Together, he whispered against her hair. Together, she agreed. Mrs. Bradford's voice carried up from below, calling everyone to supper. It would be their last meal before tomorrow's confrontation. Sarah took one final look at her revolver before holstering it. Catherine's diary, she said suddenly. We should take it too. Her words about Blackwood's threats, combined with Wells's confession. Alexander nodded. Every piece of evidence helps. He offered her his arm. Shall we? As they descended. The stairs, Sarah saw the dining room filled with their allies. Thomas conferring with Henderson. Ranch hands sharing coffee with farmers, Mrs. Bradford directing kitchen girls carrying platters of food. These were her people now, she realized. This was home. Tomorrow would bring danger, perhaps death. But tonight they would break bread together, share stories, and prepare for whatever came next. Sarah squeezed Alexander's arm, drawing strength from his presence. The loaded revolver at her hip was a constant reminder of how far she'd come from. The Boston schoolteacher who stepped off the stagecoach. She wasn't just a mail-order bride anymore. She was a woman fighting for justice, for love, for the future of this wild and beautiful territory. And tomorrow, one way or another, it would end. Dawn had barely touched the eastern sky when they rode out. Sarah's dark riding habit blended with the shadows, the saddlebags containing their precious documents secured firmly. Alexander rode beside her, his face set in grim determination. Behind them, Henderson's group clattered noisily down the main road, making no secret of their approach to town. From the river's direction came the sound of Thomas's riders, providing the second distraction. Remember, Alexander said softly as they picked their way through the pre-dawn gloom. Once we're in town, we stay to the back alleys, Judge Parker's. Clark will be waiting at the side door. Sarah nodded, one hand touching the revolver at her hip. The weight of Catherine's diary pressed against her ribs, where she'd tucked it inside her jacket. So many lives, so many stories, all coming down to this morning. The first shot rang out from the direction of the main road. Henderson's group had made contact with Blackwood's men. More gunfire erupted from the river trail. Thomas's diversion, working as planned. They reached the edge of town just as the sun crested the horizon. Light glinted off the courthouse's windows as they dismounted in a shadowy stable yard. Alexander touched Sarah's arm, pointing to movement at the corner of the building. Blackwood's got men posted, he whispered. We'll have to time this perfectly. A sudden commotion erupted on the main street, Henderson's men engaging directly with Blackwood's forces. The guards at the corner moved toward the sound drawn by the chaos. Now, Alexander said. They sprinted across the open space to the courthouse's side door. Sarah's heart pounded, expecting a shout or a shot at any moment. But they reached the door unseen, finding it unlocked as promised. Inside, the courthouse was cool and dim. Judge Parker's clerk, a thin man named Phillips, waited nervously. "Quickly," he hissed. "The judge is ready." But as they turned toward The clerk's office, a familiar voice, stopped them cold. Well, well. Marcus Blackwood stepped from the shadows, flanked by two armed men. If it isn't the grieving widower and his new lady love, come to cause more trouble? Sarah had never seen him up close before. He was a tall man, expensively dressed, with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. This was the man who had ordered Catherine's death, who had tried to destroy Alexander's life, who would kill them all for the sake of power and greed. "It's over, Blackwood," Alexander said, his voice steady. "We have proof of everything. Wells's confession, Catherine's diary, Cooper's contracts, all of it." "Proof?" Blackwood laughed. "I own half the territory, Kane. You think a few papers will matter? That anyone will dare stand against me?" He nodded to his men, who raised their weapons. "I tried to be reasonable. Offered to buy you out, offered to let you walk away, but you just had to play the hero. Like you gave Catherine a choice." Sarah's voice rang with steel. "Or James Cooper." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Unfortunate business that, but necessary, just like this is necessary." He drew his own revolver. "Drop the saddlebags, now!" Alexander moved slightly, shielding Sarah, but she stepped forward instead, her chin high. "You're right, Mr. Blackwood. You do own half the territory." Her hand moved to her jacket. "Which makes this so much more interesting." "Sarah," Alexander warned, seeing something in her expression. "Because you see," she continued, "while everyone was watching the main road and the river trail, Mrs. Bradford was meeting with a very interested party." She withdrew, not Catherine's diary, but a thick envelope. "The Railroad Commission sends its regards." Blackwood's confident smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "The Commission's been investigating you for months," Sarah said, holding up the envelope. "Every illegal water rights claim, every threatened farmer, every blocked land sale. They've built quite a case." She took a step forward. "But Cooper's evidence was the key. The proof that you were deliberately sabotaging the railroad's expansion." "You're bluffing," Blackwood snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I?" Sarah's smile was cold. "Why do you think Wells kept such detailed records? He wasn't just protecting himself from you. He was working with the Commission all along. Insurance, he called it." Alexander's sharp intake of breath told her. He'd figured it out. The timing of Cooper's land sales were coordinated with federal investigators, Sarah finished. He was their agent. That's why he needed a respectable cover story. That's why he needed... She swallowed hard. "That's why he needed a wife." Gunfire erupted outside, closer now. Through the courthouse windows, they could see Henderson's men pushing Blackwood's forces back down the street. "It doesn't matter," Blackwood said, raising his revolver. "Dead people can't testify. Dead people can't file claims. But living judges can." A new voice rang out. Judge Parker emerged from his chambers, a shotgun in his hands. Behind him stood Sheriff Tate and 3 deputies, all armed. "And I've heard quite enough." Blackwood's men looked uncertainly at their boss, guns wavering. The sheriff's deputies moved to flank them. "Drop your weapons," Tate ordered. "All of you." For a moment, Sarah thought Blackwood would surrender. Then he swung his revolver toward her with shocking speed. "You ruined everything!" 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Alexander's bullet caught Blackwood's shoulder, spinning him around. Sarah's struck his gun hand, sending the weapon flying. He crashed to the floor as his men dropped their guns, raising their hands. "Marcus Blackwood!" Judge Parker's voice rang with authority. "You're under arrest for the murders of Catherine, Kane and James Cooper, for conspiracy, extortion, and interfering with federal railroad contracts." As the deputies moved in with handcuffs, Blackwood glared up at Sarah and Alexander. "You have no idea what you've done. The territory needs men like me. We bring order to chaos." "No," Sarah said quietly. "We bring justice to corruption." Catherine knew that. Cooper died proving it. And now everyone else will know it too. Alexander's arm slipped around her waist, supporting her as the tension of the moment began to fade. Outside, they could hear cheering, Henderson's men celebrating victory. "The Railroad Commission's agents are waiting at my office," Judge Parker said. "They'll want statements from both of you." Sarah nodded, then turned to Alexander. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Catherine would be proud," she whispered. "We finished what she started." "What we all started," he corrected softly, echoing her words from earlier. Then he kissed her, right there in the courthouse, not caring who saw. When they parted, his smile was radiant. "Ready to help me build something new?" Sarah looked around. At the courthouse, at the defeated Blackwood being led away, at the dawn of justice breaking over the territory. "Together," she said firmly, "always together." The autumn sun was setting by the time they returned to Circle K Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded Sarah of her first arrival. But everything else had changed. Henderson and his men rode with them, victory and justice, won at last. Mrs. Bradford stood waiting on the porch, her face bright with happy tears. "It's done?" she asked as they dismounted. "It's done," Alexander confirmed, helping Sarah down from her horse. "Blackwood's in custody. The Railroad Commission has everything they need, and the water rights have been restored to all the legitimate landowners." Sarah watched the ranch hands and farmers celebrating, sharing coffee and whiskey as they relived the morning's events. Thomas caught her eye from across the yard and tipped his hat, a gesture of respect that warmed her heart. "There's one more." "A thing," Alexander said, taking her hand. He led her to the flower-filled valley where they'd shared their first private moment. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light as he turned to face her. "Sarah Mitchell," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "you came here looking for a new life and found yourself in the middle of our troubles instead. But without you, we never would have discovered the truth about Catherine's death. Never. It would have stopped Blackwood, never would have brought justice to this territory." He dropped to one knee, holding up a simple gold ring. "I know it's soon, and I know we've barely had time to breathe. But I love you, Sarah. I love your courage, your intelligence, your fierce heart. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and gathered her into his arms. Their kiss was sweet and tender, full of promise for the future. "I have something for you too," she said when they parted. From her pocket, she drew out a folded paper, her teaching certificate. "I want to expand the school, make it a proper place of learning for all the children in the valley. With your blessing?" Alexander's smile was radiant. "Our blessing. Everything. We build from now on. We build together." The wedding took place in the hidden valley, now bursting with late autumn wildflowers. The entire community gathered to celebrate. Ranch hands, farmers, townspeople, and even a representative from the Railroad Commission who had become a friend during the proceedings against Blackwood. Sarah wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Bradford had helped her make with Catherine's restored locket around her neck, a gift from Alexander, found among the papers in Wells's office. As she walked toward him through the wildflowers, his face glowed with a joy that matched her own. Judge Parker performed the ceremony, his usual stern demeanor softened by the occasion. "Love that grows from adversity," he said, "is the strongest kind there is. These two have faced darkness together and emerged stronger for it. Their union represents not just personal happiness, but the triumph of justice and the promise of a brighter future for our entire territory." As Alexander kissed his bride, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers. Sarah looked out at their assembled family, not by blood, but by choice and circumstance, and knew she had found more than just a husband. She had found her true home. Later, as they danced under the stars, Alexander whispered, "Happy." Sarah touched the locket at her throat, thinking of the strange path that had led her here. She had come west as a mail-order bride, seeking a simple new life. Instead, she had found love, justice, and a purpose greater than herself. "More than happy," she replied. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be,